A teacher mocked and humiliated the only black student in the class with a math problem. The next day, her granny stormed the school and left them speechless. The elderly black woman stepped into the pristine calculus classroom at Lincoln High School, her weathered hands steady as she approached the whiteboard covered in graduate-level physics equations that had stumped the entire mathematics department. In 30 seconds, she would rewrite everything they thought they knew about genius. But 12 hours earlier, her 17-year-old granddaughter Keisha had been standing at this same board, trembling with humiliation as her white teacher deliberately set her up to fail with a problem so basic it was insulting. What happened next would expose a 45-year secret that would leave everyone speechless. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. The October morning sun streamed through the tall windows of room 237 at Lincoln High School in Chicago's South Side, casting golden rectangles across the polished linoleum floor. 17-year-old Keisha Thompson sat in the third row, her burgundy sweater bright against her dark skin, natural curls pulled back with a yellow headband that matched her confident smile. Her notebook lay open, filled with neat equations written in purple ink, each problem solved with the precision of someone who genuinely loved mathematics. Did everyone finish the homework problems from Chapter 12? Mr. Patterson's voice carried across the classroom. He was a tall, thin white man in his 40s, wearing a navy blazer that seemed perpetually wrinkled. His pale blue eyes scanned the room with the casual authority of someone who had taught at Lincoln for 15 years. Keisha's hand shot up immediately, alongside maybe 6 other students in the class of 28. She had spent 2 hours the previous evening working through every problem, double-checking her calculations, even attempting the bonus questions that most students ignored. Excellent, Miss Thompson. Always prepared. Mr. Patterson's tone carried something that made Keisha's stomach flutter, though she couldn't name what. Since you're so eager, why don't you come solve problem 14 for the class? The whispers started immediately. Problem 14 was notoriously difficult, involving complex logarithmic functions that even some of the top students struggled with. Keisha felt her pulse quicken, but she stood anyway, her black sneakers squeaking slightly against the floor as she walked to the board. Behind her, she heard Tyler Morrison mutter to his friend, "This should be good," followed by a snicker that made her shoulders tense. Meanwhile, across the city in the cozy kitchen of a small brick house on Cottage Grove Avenue, 68-year-old Ruby Thompson hummed while preparing breakfast. Her silver hair was neatly braided, and she wore a soft lavender blouse with comfortable jeans. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee, warm and inviting with its yellow walls decorated with family photos spanning 3 generations. Ruby cracked eggs into a ceramic bowl, her movements precise and measured. As she whisked, her eyes fell on the morning newspaper folded beside the stove. The headline read, "Local University Seeks Solutions to Climate Modeling Problem." She paused, her hand stilling as she read the first paragraph describing complex atmospheric equations that had puzzled researchers for months. Without thinking, Ruby reached for a pencil from the cup beside the phone. In the margin of the newspaper, she began sketching equations, her handwriting small but elegant. Heat transfer coefficients, fluid dynamics, thermodynamic variables. Her pencil moved with surprising speed and confidence, as if these concepts were as familiar as her grandmother's recipes. "Grandmother's law of conservation," she whispered to herself, a phrase that hadn't crossed her lips in decades. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the pencil, staring at the equations she had just written. They were correct. She knew they were correct, and that knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. The sound of the school bus rumbling down the street snapped her back to reality. Keisha would be home in 8 hours, hopefully with good news about her calculus test next week. Ruby folded the newspaper quickly, hiding her equations, and returned to breakfast preparation. Back at Lincoln High, Keisha stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, feeling the weight of 27 pairs of eyes on her back. The problem stared at her mockingly, a complex logarithmic equation involving natural log functions and exponential growth rates. She took a deep breath and began writing. The first step came easily, simplifying the logarithmic terms. Her handwriting was neat, confident. Behind her, the classroom had fallen silent except for the scratching of her marker against the board. "Looking good so far," she heard Jessica Martinez whisper encouragingly from the front row. Keisha smiled slightly and continued. The second step required factoring out common terms, which she accomplished with careful attention to detail. Her confidence began to build as the solution took shape. But then came the third step, and something went wrong. The numbers weren't cooperating the way they should. She erased and tried again, her purple marker squeaking against the board. Still wrong. Her palms began to sweat as she realized that half the class was shifting restlessly in their seats. "Take your time, Miss Thompson," Mr. Patterson said from behind his desk, but there was something in his voice that made her skin crawl. "We all know you're very thorough." The way he said thorough made it sound like an insult. Keisha's hand trembled slightly as she attempted the calculation for a third time, but the anxiety was making it impossible to think clearly. The equation that had seemed manageable in her homework now felt like a foreign language. "Maybe someone else should try," called out Brad Chen from the back row, his voice carrying just loud enough for everyone to hear. No, Mr. Patterson said, rising from his chair with theatrical slowness. Miss Thompson was so eager to show us her mathematical prowess. Let's give her all the time she needs. Meanwhile, Ruby stood in her garden behind the house, tending to her late-blooming chrysanthemums. The October air was crisp, and she wore a green cardigan over her lavender blouse. As she worked, her mind wandered to an article she had read about quantum mechanics applications in computing. Almost unconsciously, she began calculating probability matrices in her head, working through complex statistical models while deadheading flowers. A neighbor walking past might have seen just an elderly woman gardening. They couldn't have known that she was simultaneously solving graduate-level physics problems in her mind, the way other people might hum their favorite songs. Her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message from Keisha, test in calculus next week. Feeling nervous but excited. Love you, Grandma Ruby. Ruby smiled and typed back quickly. You've got this, baby girl. Mathematics is in your blood. Trust yourself. She hesitated before sending the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. Mathematics is in your blood. If only Keisha knew how true that statement really was. Ruby's mind flashed to a memory from 1978, standing in front of a university classroom, explaining quantum field theory to a room of graduate students, her equations covering 3 entire blackboards. She had been younger then than Keisha was now, already on track for her doctorate in theoretical physics. But that was before everything changed. Before the choice that had redirected the entire course of her life. Ruby shook her head and sent the text, pushing the memories away as she had done for 45 years. At Lincoln High, Keisha's confidence was crumbling with each passing minute. The problem that should have taken 5 minutes had stretched to 15, and she could feel the amusement radiating from her classmates. Her marker had left smudges on the board from her repeated erasures, and her burgundy sweater felt too warm under the fluorescent lights. Perhaps, Mr. Patterson said, approaching the board with his hands clasped behind his back, this problem is a bit beyond your current level, Miss Thompson. No shame in admitting when we're in over our heads. The words hit her like a physical blow. Around the classroom, she could hear the subtle sounds of suppressed laughter, the rustle of students exchanging glances, the scrape of chairs as people leaned forward to get a better view of her humiliation. Jessica Martinez looked genuinely sympathetic, but most of the other faces showed varying degrees of amusement or discomfort. Tyler Morrison was openly smirking, while Brad Chen had pulled out his phone to presumably text about the entertainment unfolding at the front of the room. I can figure it out, Keisha said quietly, her voice barely audible. I just need another minute. I think you've had quite enough time, Mr. Patterson replied, gently taking the marker from her hand. Why don't you return to your seat, and I'll show the class how this problem should actually be solved. As Keisha walked back to her desk on unsteady legs, she caught fragments of whispered conversations. Always acts so smart. Thought she knew everything. Embarrassing. The bell rang exactly as Mr. Patterson finished solving the problem on the board with flourish, his solution elegant and complete. Keisha remained in her seat as her classmates filed out, staring at her notebook where she had attempted the same problem just hours before and gotten it completely right. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The humiliation began with a smile. Mr. Patterson stood at the front of room 237 the next morning, his navy blazer pressed and his pale blue eyes gleaming with what Keisha had once mistaken for encouragement. The October sun cast the same golden rectangles across the floor, but today they felt harsh and exposing rather than warm. Class, I have a special treat for you this Thursday morning, he announced, his voice carrying that theatrical quality that made Keisha's stomach clench. Miss Thompson has volunteered to demonstrate her mathematical abilities with a problem that should be right in her wheelhouse. Keisha's head snapped up from her notebook. She hadn't volunteered for anything. Her burgundy sweater suddenly felt too tight around her neck, and her yellow headband seemed to press against her temples. I didn't volunteer, she said quietly, but Mr. Patterson was already writing on the whiteboard with deliberate, exaggerated strokes. The problem appeared line by line, a basic quadratic equation that any sophomore could solve. 2x superscript 2 plus 8x plus 6 is equal to 0. It was insultingly simple, the kind of problem typically assigned to students who were struggling with foundational concepts. A ripple of confusion moved through the classroom. Jessica Martinez frowned at her desk in the front row. Even Tyler Morrison looked puzzled, his usual smirk replaced by uncertainty. Mr. Patterson, Keisha said, her voice stronger now, that's a sophomore-level problem. We're studying advanced logarithmic functions. Are you refusing to solve it, Miss Thompson? His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Perhaps you find even basic quadratics challenging. The word challenging hung in the air like a slap. Around the classroom, Keisha could feel the shift in atmosphere as her classmates began to understand what was happening. This wasn't about mathematics. This was about something else entirely. Brad Chen pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages but clearly preparing to document whatever was about to unfold. Tyler Morrison's smirk returned, broader now and more cruel. In the front row, Jessica Martinez looked genuinely uncomfortable, her dark eyes darting between Keisha and the teacher. Fine, Keisha said, standing with as much dignity as she could muster. Her black sneakers felt heavy as she walked to the board, and she could hear the whispers starting behind her like static electricity before a storm. This should be quick, someone muttered. Maybe she really doesn't know basic math, came another voice. Quiet down, everyone, Mr. Patterson said with false authority. Let's give Miss Thompson the respectful attention she deserves. The way he emphasized respectful made it clear that respect was the last thing on his mind. Keisha reached for the blue marker with trembling fingers, acutely aware that every movement was being scrutinized by 27 pairs of eyes. She began writing the solution methodically. First, dividing the entire equation by 2 to simplify. Then applying the quadratic formula. Her handwriting was neat despite her nervousness, each number and symbol placed with careful precision. Interesting approach, Mr. Patterson commented when she had completed the first step. Though most students would factor this directly. Are you sure the quadratic formula is necessary for such a simple problem? The emphasis on simple sent heat flooding through Keisha's cheeks. She knew he was right about the factoring, But she had chosen the quadratic formula because it was more thorough, more complete. Now it looked like she was overcomplicating an easy problem. Both methods work, she said defensively, continuing with her calculations. Of course they do, Mr. Patterson replied smoothly. Though efficiency is generally valued in mathematics. Time management and all that. Behind her, Keisha could hear the subtle sounds of amusement. Suppressed giggles, the scratch of pens as students took notes about her mistake, the creak of chairs as people leaned forward to get a better view. She finished the problem correctly, writing the final answer on the board x equals -1, x equals -3. The solution was perfect, mathematically sound, and completely accurate. Well done, Mr. Patterson said, but his tone suggested anything but praise. Though I have to wonder why someone who claims to excel at advanced calculus needed the quadratic formula for a problem most of my sophomore students could factor in their heads. The classroom erupted in barely contained laughter. Not everyone was laughing, but enough where that the sound felt like a physical assault. Keisha turned to face the class and saw faces that ranged from amused to uncomfortable to openly mocking. Maybe she's not as smart as she thinks, Tyler Morrison said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Tyler, Jessica Martinez hissed, but her reprimand was lost in the wave of snickers that followed. Actually, Mr. Patterson continued, approaching the board where Keisha still stood frozen, let's try another one. Since you're so fond of the quadratic formula. He erased her work with quick, dismissive strokes and wrote a new problem. X superscript 2, 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. This one was even simpler. It factored easily into x2, x3 equals 0, giving solutions of x equals 2 and x equals 3. Any student in the room could solve it by inspection. Go ahead, Miss Thompson. Show us your mathematical prowess. The word prowess dripped with sarcasm. Keisha stared at the problem, knowing that no matter how she solved it, she would look foolish. If she factored it quickly, she would prove his point that she had overcomplicated the first problem. If she used the quadratic formula again, she would look like she didn't understand basic mathematics. Her hands began to shake visibly. The marker felt slippery in her palm, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Around the classroom, phones were definitely out now, cameras recording her humiliation for social media posterity. Take your time, Mr. Patterson said with false kindness. No pressure at all. But there was enormous pressure. The pressure of being the only black student in advanced mathematics. The pressure of representing her family's belief in education. The pressure of proving that she belonged in this classroom, in this school, in this world of academic achievement that sometimes felt like it was designed to exclude people who looked like her. She began writing again, her handwriting less steady now. This time she chose to factor, determined to show that she understood the most efficient approach. But her hands were shaking so badly that her numbers looked sloppy, unprofessional. Is that a 6 or an 8? Called out Brad Chen, squinting at the board theatrically. Definitely an 8, Tyler Morrison replied. Maybe she needs to practice her basic arithmetic before moving on to algebra. The laughter was louder now, less restrained. Even some of the quieter students were smiling, caught up in the cruel momentum of group mockery. Keisha felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of these people. Perhaps, Mr. Patterson said, moving closer to the board, we should revisit some foundational concepts before attempting more advanced material. There's no shame in acknowledging our limitations. There's nothing wrong with my limitations, Keisha said, her voice cracking slightly on the last word. Of course not, he replied smoothly. Everyone has different aptitudes. Some students excel at mathematics, others find their strengths in different areas. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a general education track. The suggestion hung in the air like poison. General education track meant giving up on her dreams of engineering school, of following her passion for mathematics and science, of proving that a girl from the South Side could compete with anyone. "I belong in this class," she said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Do you?" Mr. Patterson asked, tilting his head with mock concern. "Because struggling with basic quadratics suggests otherwise." The final bell rang at that moment, releasing the class into the hallway with a buzz of excited chatter. As students filed out, Keisha heard fragments of their conversations. "Did you see her hands shaking? She thinks she's so smart, but she can't even factor a simple equation. My little sister could solve that problem. Someone should post that video." Jessica Martinez paused at Keisha's desk as she gathered her things. "Hey, don't listen to them," she said softly. "That was messed up." But her kindness only made the humiliation worse. Keisha nodded without speaking, afraid that any words would release the tears she was barely holding back. As the classroom emptied, Mr. Patterson returned to his desk, shuffling papers with obvious satisfaction. "Miss Thompson," he called as she reached the door, "I hope you'll consider what we discussed today. Sometimes it takes courage to admit when we're in over our heads." Keisha walked into the hallway on unsteady legs, her burgundy sweater now damp with perspiration, her yellow headband feeling like a crown of shame. The corridors of Lincoln High School stretched before her like a gauntlet, filled with students who had either witnessed her humiliation or would soon hear about it through the relentless network of teenage gossip. She had never felt smaller in her entire life. Keisha's bedroom door slammed with enough force to rattle the family photos lining the upstairs hallway of the small brick house on Cottage Grove Avenue. The sound echoed through the afternoon quiet like a gunshot, followed by the unmistakable click of the lock turning. "Keisha!" Ruby's voice drifted up the stairs, concern threading through the single word. She had been folding laundry in the living room when her granddaughter burst through the front door without her usual cheerful greeting, without stopping for their traditional after-school snack, without even acknowledging Ruby's presence. Only silence answered from above. Ruby set down the pale blue towel she had been folding and climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the wooden banister worn smooth by decades of use. Family photographs watched her ascent. Keisha's graduation from 8th grade, her mother Angela's wedding day, Ruby's own high school picture from 1973 when her natural hair formed a perfect afro and her eyes sparkled with the confidence of someone who believed the world was waiting for her brilliance. "Baby girl." Ruby knocked gently on the bedroom door. "Talk to your grandmother." "Leave me alone." The words came out muffled, as if Keisha had buried her face in pillows. "Please, Grandma Ruby. I just want to be alone right now." Ruby pressed her palm against the door, feeling the vibration of movement from within. She could hear dresser drawers opening and slamming shut, the sound of books being moved around aggressively, the creak of bed springs as Keisha threw herself down with theatrical force. "I'm making your favorite cookies," Ruby tried, using the same gentle tone that had soothed countless childhood scraped knees and hurt feelings. "Those snickerdoodles with extra cinnamon." "I don't want cookies." Keisha's voice cracked, and Ruby could hear the tears she was trying so hard to suppress. "I don't want anything. I just want to disappear." Inside her room, Keisha sat on her bed surrounded by the remnants of her former confidence. Her calculus textbook lay open to a page of logarithmic functions that now seemed to mock her with their complexity. Her purple pen, the one she used for all her math homework, had been thrown across the room and now rested beneath her desk chair like a casualty of war. The yellow headband that had felt so bright and cheerful that morning now lay crumpled on her nightstand, a reminder of how foolish she had looked standing at that whiteboard. She had changed out of her burgundy sweater the moment she got home, unable to bear wearing anything that connected her to the humiliation in room 237. Now she wore an oversized gray hoodie that belonged to her mother, the fabric soft and comforting against her skin. She pulled the hood up over her natural curls, creating a cocoon of darkness that felt safer than facing the world. Her phone buzzed constantly on the comforter beside her. Text messages from classmates, notifications from social media, the digital aftermath of her public shame spreading through Lincoln High School like wildfire. She couldn't bring herself to look at the screen, terrified of what she might find. The worst part wasn't even the laughter or the recording phones. The worst part was the doubt that now gnawed at her confidence like acid. What if Mr. Patterson was right? What if she really wasn't smart enough for advanced mathematics? What if she had been fooling herself all these years, believing she could compete when she was actually just pretending? Downstairs, Ruby stood in her kitchen, staring at the morning newspaper still folded beside the stove. Her equations from earlier remained visible in the margins, the complex atmospheric calculations that had flowed from her pencil like water. She had hidden her brilliance for so long that sometimes she almost forgot it existed. But moments like this, when mathematics called to her, she remembered everything she had given up. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Angela's name appeared on the screen. "Mama, is everything okay? Keisha just texted me that she's never going back to school." Ruby sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly feeling every one of her 68 years. Something happened today. She won't talk to me about it, but she's locked herself in her room. "This isn't like her," Angela said, and Ruby could hear the worry threading through her daughter's voice. Angela was at work at the community health clinic, probably stealing a few minutes between patients to check on her daughter. Keisha loves school. She loves math more than anything. "I know, baby. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. Should I come home early? I can probably get coverage for the rest of my shift." Ruby considered this, but Angela had already used too many sick days this year when Keisha had the flu. Single mothers couldn't afford to miss work, especially not at jobs that barely paid enough to cover rent and groceries. "No, stay at work. Let me try to talk to her again." "But Angela..." Ruby hesitated, then plunged ahead. "If this is about what I think it might be about, we might need to have some difficult conversations." "What do you mean?" Ruby closed her eyes, seeing herself at 17, standing in front of a university blackboard covered with quantum equations, feeling like she could solve any problem the universe threw at her. "I mean that sometimes the world doesn't want brilliant black girls to know how brilliant they are." After hanging up, Ruby climbed the stairs again. This time she didn't knock on Keisha's door. Instead, she settled herself on the hallway floor outside the bedroom, her back against the wall, and began to speak in the voice she had used for bedtime stories when Keisha was small. "You know, baby girl, I never told you about my first day of college." Inside the room, the sounds of movement stopped. "I was 17 years old, younger than you are now, and I walked into Professor Williams' advanced physics class wearing my best dress. It was royal blue with little white flowers, and I felt so proud walking across that campus." Ruby's voice carried easily through the thin door, warm and steady despite the pain of the memory. "I was the only black student in that class. The only woman, too. And when Professor Williams saw me, he said maybe I was lost. Maybe I was looking for the education building instead of the science department." A soft thud from inside suggested that Keisha had moved closer to the door. "But I wasn't lost, baby girl. I belonged in that classroom more than anyone else there. I could solve equations in my head that took them 20 minutes with calculators. I understood concepts that made graduate students cry. And you know what I did." Silence from the bedroom, but Ruby knew she was listening. "I solved every problem he put on that board. I answered every question he asked. I proved to everyone in that room that my mind was a gift, not a mistake." Ruby paused, remembering the thrill of that moment, the electricity of intellectual combat and victory. But then she remembered what came after. The pregnancy that changed everything. The choice between her dreams and her daughter. The way her notebooks full of equations had been replaced by diaper-changing schedules and lullabies. "Keisha," she said softly, "whatever happened today, it doesn't define who you are. You are brilliant. You are capable. And you are loved." The lock clicked open. Keisha appeared in the doorway, her face blotchy from crying, the gray hoodie making her look smaller and younger than her 17 years. "Grandma Ruby, what if I'm not smart enough? What if I've been lying to myself this whole time?" Ruby stood slowly, her knees creaking with the effort, and opened her arms. Keisha fell into them like a child, and Ruby held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her granddaughter's hair products and teenage heartbreak. "Tell me what happened," Ruby said quietly. "Tell me everything." And slowly, haltingly, through tears and anger and shame, Keisha told her about Mr. Patterson's cruel smile, about the basic problems designed to humiliate, about the laughter of her classmates and the phones recording her misery. She told her about feeling stupid and small, and like maybe she didn't belong in advanced mathematics after all. Ruby listened without interrupting, but with each word, something cold and hard formed in her chest. Something that had been sleeping for decades was beginning to wake up, and it was furious. When Keisha finished, Ruby held her at arm's length and looked directly into her eyes. "Baby girl, you're not going to school tomorrow." "I know. I can't face them again." "No," Ruby said, her voice carrying a new quality that Keisha had never heard before. "You're not going alone. We're going together. Grandma, you don't understand. This isn't something you can fix with cookies and hugs." Ruby's smile was sharp and dangerous, like sunlight reflecting off a blade. "Oh, sweet child. You have no idea what your grandmother can fix." Friday morning arrived gray and cold, November wind rattling the windows of the brick house on Cottage Grove Avenue. Keisha stood at her bedroom window, still wearing the oversized gray hoodie from the day before, watching the yellow school bus lumber down the street without her for the second day in a row. "I'm not going," she called down the stairs, though her voice lacked the conviction it had held yesterday. "I told you, Grandma Ruby. I can't face them." Ruby's voice floated up from the kitchen, steady and determined. "Get dressed, baby girl. Wear something that makes you feel strong. We leave in 30 minutes. Did you hear me? I said I'm not going. I heard you perfectly. Now I'm telling you that yes, you are. And I'm going with you." Keisha sank onto her bed, staring at her reflection in the dresser mirror across the room. Her natural curls were flattened on one side from restless sleep, and her brown eyes looked puffy from crying. She looked exactly like what she felt, defeated. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another message from Jessica Martinez. "Hey, are you okay? You missed yesterday and people are asking about you. Call me." 3 more texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Probably classmates wanting to know if she was planning to show up so they could witness whatever fresh humiliation Mr. Patterson had planned. The thought made her stomach clench. Keisha Marie Thompson. Ruby's voice carried the full authority of 3 generations of strong women. "Do not make me come up there and pick out your clothes for you." Something in her grandmother's tone made Keisha pause. She had heard Ruby use that voice exactly twice in her life. Once when a neighbor's dog had gotten loose and charged toward 5-year-old Keisha, and once when an insurance salesman had tried to take advantage of Ruby's age and politeness. Both times, the authority in that voice had stopped trouble in its tracks. 20 minutes later, Keisha descended the stairs wearing dark jeans and a soft purple sweater that brought out the warm undertones in her brown skin. She had pulled her curls back into a low bun and forced herself to apply enough concealer to hide the worst of the puffiness around her eyes. Ruby stood by the front door, and Keisha stopped short at the sight of her. Her grandmother wore a tailored black pantsuit that Keisha had never seen before, with a crisp white blouse underneath. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant updo, and she carried a leather briefcase that looked both expensive and well-used. "Grandma, where did you get that outfit?" "I've had it for a long time," Ruby replied, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Some things you keep even when you think you'll never need them again." The briefcase was the most puzzling part. Keisha had lived with her grandmother for 3 years, ever since her mother Angela had taken the job at the community health clinic that required long hours and occasional overnight shifts. In all that time, she had never seen Ruby carry anything more professional than her church purse. "What's in the briefcase?" Ruby's smile was mysterious and slightly dangerous. "Insurance." The drive to Lincoln High School took 12 minutes through the familiar streets of Chicago's South Side. Ruby drove with unusual precision, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes focused on the road ahead with the intensity of someone preparing for battle. "Grandma, you don't have to do this," Keisha said as they pulled into the school parking lot. "Mr. Patterson isn't going to listen to you. He'll just think you're another angry parent making excuses for her granddaughter." "Will he?" Ruby parked the car near the main entrance and turned to look at Keisha directly. "Baby girl, there are things about your grandmother that you don't know. Things I've kept quiet about for good reasons. But sometimes quiet doesn't serve us anymore." "What are you talking about?" Ruby reached over and took Keisha's hand, her grip warm and steady. "I'm talking about the fact that you are not the first Thompson woman to face people who want to make you feel small. And you're not going to face them alone." The main hallway of Lincoln High School buzzed with its usual Friday morning energy. Students clustered around lockers, chattering about weekend plans and upcoming tests. The familiar sounds of teenage life surrounded them as they walked toward the main office. Locker doors slamming, sneakers squeaking on polished floors, the distant sound of a basketball bouncing in the gymnasium. Several students recognized Keisha and nudged their friends, pointing in her direction. She kept her eyes focused straight ahead, but she could hear the whispers following in their wake. "That's the girl from the video. She's back. This should be interesting. Is that her grandmother? Why is she here?" At the main office, the secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked up with professional politeness that shifted to concern when she saw Keisha's face. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "We need to speak with Principal Johnson," Ruby said, her voice carrying the same authority it had held at home. "And we need to speak with Mr. Patterson." "Do you have an appointment?" "Principal Johnson's schedule is quite full today." Ruby set her briefcase on the counter with a soft thud that somehow commanded attention. "This won't take long. But it needs to happen now." Something in Ruby's bearing, the quiet confidence of her posture and the directness of her gaze, made Mrs. Rodriguez reach for the phone without further argument. "Let me see what I can do." While they waited, Keisha became increasingly aware of the attention they were drawing. Students passing by the office slowed their steps, craning their necks to get a better look. A few pulled out phones, and Keisha realized with sinking horror that her presence at school was about to become social media news again. "Grandma, maybe we should just go home," she whispered. "This is making everything worse." "No, baby girl. Running away makes things worse. Standing up makes things better." Principal Johnson emerged from his office 5 minutes later. He was a tall black man in his 50s, wearing a navy suit and carrying himself with the weary dignity of someone who had spent decades navigating the complexities of public education. His expression was polite but cautious as he approached them. "Mrs. Thompson? I'm Principal Johnson. How can I help you today?" "We need to discuss what happened in Mr. Patterson's classroom on Thursday morning," Ruby replied, her voice steady and professional. "My granddaughter was subjected to treatment that was inappropriate and educationally unsound." Principal Johnson's expression grew more serious. "I see. Why don't we continue this conversation in my office? Mrs. Rodriguez, could you please ask Mr. Patterson to join us when he has a moment?" He's in class right now, Mrs. Rodriguez replied, checking her computer screen. Advanced Calculus, room 237. That's perfect, Ruby said, lifting her briefcase. Let's go there. Mrs. Thompson, I don't think interrupting a class is the best approach. Ruby turned to face Principal Johnson directly, and something in her expression made him stop mid-sentence. Principal Johnson, my granddaughter was humiliated in front of her peers by a teacher who used his position of authority to make her feel inferior. That teacher is currently in a classroom with other students who deserve better than an educator who thinks embarrassment is a teaching tool. So yes, we're going to interrupt his class. The walk down the hallway to room 237 felt like a death march to Keisha. Students they passed turned to stare, and she was certain that by lunchtime, everyone in school would know that she had brought her grandmother to fight her battles for her. The humiliation would be complete. But as they approached the familiar classroom door, Keisha noticed something strange. Ruby's step had changed. She walked with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged in academic buildings, someone comfortable with intellectual authority. The briefcase in her hand no longer looked out of place, but instead seemed like a natural extension of her professional bearing. "Grandma," Keisha whispered as they paused outside room 237. "What exactly are you planning to do?" Ruby's smile was sharp and confident, carrying an edge that Keisha had never seen before. "I'm planning to remind some people that they shouldn't make assumptions about what they don't understand." Through the small window in the classroom door, they could see Mr. Patterson at the whiteboard, gesturing as he explained something to his students. He looked comfortable, authoritative, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. Ruby knocked on the doorframe and stepped into the room without waiting for permission. "Mr. Patterson, I believe we need to talk." The classroom fell silent as Ruby stepped through the doorway, her black pantsuit and leather briefcase creating an immediate shift in the room's energy. Mr. Patterson paused mid-sentence, his marker frozen against the whiteboard where he had been explaining derivative functions to his third-period class. "I'm sorry, but this is a private classroom," he said, his pale blue eyes narrowing as he took in Ruby's professional appearance. "If you need to speak with me, please make an appointment through the main office." "My name is Ruby Thompson," she replied, setting her briefcase on an empty desk in the front row. "I believe you know my granddaughter, Keisha." Mr. Patterson's gaze shifted to Keisha, who stood frozen in the doorway beside Principal Johnson. The students in the classroom turned in their seats, sensing drama about to unfold. Several phones appeared discreetly, held low but clearly recording. "Ah, yes. Miss Thompson." Mr. Patterson's voice carried the same condescending tone that had haunted Keisha's nightmares. "I trust she's been practicing her basic mathematics at home?" The snickers from several students were immediate and cruel. Ruby heard them, cataloged them, and filed them away for later consideration. But her attention remained focused on the man at the whiteboard who had dared to diminish her granddaughter. "Actually, Mr. Patterson, I'm here because I have some concerns about your teaching methods. Specifically, your tendency to use humiliation as an educational tool." "Mrs. Thompson," Principal Johnson interjected diplomatically, "perhaps we should continue this discussion in my office." "No," Ruby said quietly, but with absolute authority. "It happened in this classroom, in front of these students. It should be addressed here." Mr. Patterson straightened to his full height, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand that parents sometimes have difficulty accepting their children's academic limitations. But sugarcoating reality doesn't help anyone improve." "Academic limitations?" Ruby's voice remained perfectly calm, but Keisha noticed her grandmother's hands had stilled in a way that reminded her of a cat before it pounced. "Tell me, Mr. Patterson, what exactly do you know about academic limitations?" "I have 15 years of teaching experience and a master's degree in mathematics education," he replied stiffly. I think I'm qualified to assess student capabilities. Ruby opened her briefcase with deliberate precision. The leather was worn but well maintained, and as the lid lifted, Keisha caught a glimpse of documents, notebooks, and what looked like academic journals. Ruby pulled out a manila folder and set it on the desk. 15 years, she mused, flipping through papers. That's impressive. Tell me, in those 15 years, have you ever published research? Contributed to mathematical journals? Presented at academic conferences? Mr. Patterson's expression grew defensive. Teaching is my focus. Not everyone needs to be a researcher. Of course not, Ruby agreed pleasantly. But surely someone so concerned with academic standards would appreciate intellectual achievement when they encounter it. She pulled a document from the folder and held it up. Even from across the room, Keisha could see it was some kind of certificate or diploma, official-looking with embossed seals. This is my doctoral diploma from the University of Chicago, Ruby said conversationally. Theoretical physics, with a specialization in quantum mechanics. I defended my dissertation in December of 1978. The classroom went dead silent. Mr. Patterson's face drained of color, and several students exchanged shocked glances. Keisha felt her world tilt sideways. Her grandmother had a doctorate? In physics? I don't understand, she whispered. Ruby pulled out another document. This is my acceptance letter to the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. I was invited to join their theoretical physics program in 1979, working alongside some of the most brilliant minds in the field. Grandma Ruby, Keisha's voice cracked. You never told me. There's more, baby girl. Ruby's voice grew softer, more personal, though she never took her eyes off Mr. Patterson. This is a letter from Dr. Chen-Ning Yang, Nobel Prize winner, recommending me for a postdoctoral fellowship. He called my work on quantum field applications groundbreaking and essential to the future of theoretical physics. The papers seemed to multiply as Ruby laid them out. Research publications, conference presentations, letters of recommendation from physicists whose names appeared in textbooks. Each document was another piece of a puzzle that Keisha had never known existed. You were a physicist, Keisha said, the words feeling strange and impossible in her mouth. I was going to be, Ruby corrected gently. I was 20 years old, about to change the world with my research on quantum applications to energy systems. My thesis advisor said I was the most naturally gifted theoretical mind he had encountered in 30 years of teaching. She pulled out one final document, this one yellowed with age and worn from handling. It was a handwritten letter, the ink faded but still legible. This is a letter I wrote to Princeton in March of 1979, declining their fellowship offer. Ruby's voice grew quiet. I was 3 months pregnant with your mother. The silence in the classroom was profound. Even the students who had been recording seemed to have forgotten their phones, caught up in the revelation unfolding before them. I had a choice to make, Ruby continued, her eyes still focused on Mr. Patterson's stunned face. I could pursue my dreams of academic achievement, or I could raise my daughter. In 1979, for a young black woman with no family support, there wasn't really a choice at all. Keisha felt tears burning her eyes as pieces of her family history rearranged themselves in her mind. Her grandmother's uncanny ability to help with math homework. The way Ruby could glance at a problem and immediately see the solution. The advanced textbooks that Ruby claimed were just interesting reading, hidden in the back of her bedroom closet. So I put away my equations and my dreams, Ruby said, finally turning to look at Keisha. I got a job as a bank teller, raised your mother, and never looked back. I told myself that love was more important than achievement, that family mattered more than recognition. You gave up everything, Keisha whispered. I gave up nothing, Ruby replied firmly. I chose love. I chose family. I chose your mother, and through her, I chose you. And every single day for 45 years, I have been grateful for that choice." She turned back to Mr. Patterson, who stood frozen at the whiteboard like a statue. "But what I will not choose, Mr. Patterson, is to let you destroy my granddaughter's confidence the way this world tried to destroy mine. Keisha is brilliant. She is capable. She belongs in advanced mathematics, and she belongs in any college program she chooses to pursue." Ruby began gathering her documents, sliding them back into the manila folder with practiced efficiency. "Moreover, your teaching methods are pedagogically unsound. Using humiliation to motivate students violates every principle of effective education. Creating problems designed to embarrass rather than challenge shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how learning works." Mr. Patterson finally found his voice. "Mrs. Dr. Thompson, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Ruby replied calmly. "You made assumptions based on appearances, just like you did with Keisha. You saw an elderly black woman and assumed ignorance. You saw a brilliant black girl and assumed limitation." She snapped the briefcase closed with a sound like a gunshot. "The difference is, Mr. Patterson, I'm old enough and experienced enough to handle your assumptions. Keisha is 17 years old, and your cruelty could have damaged her relationship with mathematics forever." Principal Johnson, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, finally stepped forward. "Dr. Thompson, I think we should definitely continue this conversation in my office. Mr. Patterson, please arrange for coverage of your class." As they prepared to leave, Ruby paused at Keisha's desk and placed a gentle hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "Baby girl, there's something else you need to understand about your legacy," she said quietly. "Your mother graduated summa cum laude from nursing school. Your great-grandmother was the first black woman to own property in this neighborhood. Intelligence runs in our family like blood runs through our veins." She squeezed Keisha's shoulder gently. "You don't have to prove you're smart to anyone in this room. You just have to remember who you are and where you come from." As they walked toward the door, Keisha caught sight of her reflection in the classroom window. For the first time in 3 days, she stood up straight, her shoulders back, her chin lifted with pride she had inherited but never fully understood until this moment. The November afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Principal Johnson's office as Ruby and Keisha sat across from his desk, the manila folder of documents resting between them like a bridge connecting past and present. Mr. Patterson had been excused for the remainder of the day, his face pale and his usual arrogance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. "Dr. Thompson," Principal Johnson said, settling back in his chair with obvious respect, "I want to apologize on behalf of Lincoln High School for what happened in Mr. Patterson's classroom. That kind of treatment is absolutely unacceptable." Ruby nodded graciously. "I appreciate that, Principal Johnson. But my primary concern isn't punishment. It's prevention. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other students." "Absolutely. We'll be implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all faculty members, and I'll be personally observing Mr. Patterson's classes for the remainder of the semester." As the adults discussed policy changes and administrative responses, Keisha found herself staring at her grandmother with new eyes. The woman who had packed her lunch every morning for 3 years, who hummed while doing dishes, who fell asleep watching game shows in her recliner, had once been on track to revolutionize theoretical physics. "Grandma Ruby," she said softly when there was a pause in the conversation, "why didn't you ever tell me? About Princeton, about your research, about everything." Ruby's expression grew tender as she turned to face her granddaughter fully. "Baby girl, there are some stories that are too heavy for children to carry. I wanted you to love mathematics because it brought you joy, not because you felt obligated to fulfill your grandmother's abandoned dreams. But I could have learned from you. You could have taught me so much more than I ever learned in school." "Oh, sweet child," Ruby laughed softly. "Who do you think taught you that shortcuts in long division? Who showed you how to see patterns in algebraic equations? Who helped you understand that mathematics is about logic and beauty, not just memorization?" Keisha's eyes widened as memories shifted and rearranged themselves. All those evenings at the kitchen table, Ruby patiently explaining concepts that seemed to flow from her mind like water. The way she could glance at Keisha's homework and immediately spot errors that had taken Keisha 20 minutes to find. The advanced math books on Ruby's nightstand that she had always claimed were just for fun. "You've been teaching me all along," Keisha whispered. "I've been sharing what I could without burdening you with what I gave up," Ruby corrected gently. "There's a difference." Principal Johnson cleared his throat respectfully. "Dr. Thompson, if you don't mind me asking, would you be interested in speaking to our advanced mathematics students? Maybe sharing some of your research experience?" Ruby's smile was warm but definitive. "That's very kind, but I'm retired from academia. My focus now is on my family." After the meeting concluded and they walked back through the hallways of Lincoln High School, Keisha noticed how different everything felt. Students still watched them pass, but the whispers seemed less cruel and more curious. Word had already spread about the elderly black woman who had walked into Mr. Patterson's classroom with a briefcase full of doctoral credentials. "Keisha!" Jessica Martinez appeared at her locker, her dark eyes bright with excitement. "Oh my goodness, is it true? Is your grandmother really a physicist?" "Dr. Martinez," Ruby corrected with gentle humor. "And yes, though it was a long time ago." Jessica's jaw dropped. "That's incredible. You must be so proud, Keisha." For the first time in days, Keisha smiled genuinely. "I'm learning that proud doesn't even begin to cover it." They drove home in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Ruby hummed softly as she navigated the familiar streets, while Keisha stared out the passenger window and tried to process everything she had learned about her family history. "Grandma," she said as they pulled into the driveway of the brick house on Cottage Grove Avenue, "can I see them? Your research papers, your equations, everything you put away." Ruby's hands stilled on the steering wheel. "Are you sure you want to, baby girl? Some of those dreams are 45 years old. They might be dusty and faded. I'm sure." Ruby's bedroom was a place Keisha had entered countless times, but she had never really explored it. While Ruby made tea in the kitchen, Keisha sat on the quilted bedspread and watched her grandmother open the large cedar chest that had always sat beneath the window. "I told myself I was keeping these for historical purposes," Ruby said, lifting out carefully preserved notebooks. "But I think I always hoped that someday someone in the family might want to see them." The notebooks were filled with equations that looked like poetry written in a mathematical language. Ruby's handwriting from 45 years ago was neat and confident, covering page after page with calculations that Keisha could barely comprehend. Diagrams of particle interactions, theories about energy transfer, hypotheses about quantum applications that seemed decades ahead of their time. "This is beautiful," Keisha breathed, tracing her finger along a particularly elegant equation. "It's like music written in numbers." "That's exactly what it felt like," Ruby said, settling beside her on the bed with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. "When I was working on a problem, the rest of the world would just disappear. It was pure thought, pure possibility. Do you miss it?" Ruby was quiet for a long moment, sipping her tea and staring at the notebook spread across the comforter. "I miss the feeling of discovery," she said finally. "That moment when a solution would click into place and I could see the universe working in a way that no one else had seen before. But missing something and regretting its absence are different things." She picked up one of the notebooks and opened it to a page filled with complex calculations about energy conservation. I was working on a theory about converting thermal energy into electrical power with near-perfect efficiency, she explained. If I had continued this research, it might have revolutionized renewable energy systems. Keisha leaned closer, trying to follow the mathematical logic. Could you still work on it? I mean, now that you have more time. Ruby's smile was bittersweet. Baby girl, theoretical physics is a young person's game. My mind is still sharp, but the cutting edge of research has moved far beyond where I left off. The mathematics I knew is just the foundation for what scientists are doing today. They spent the next hour going through Ruby's academic treasures. Letters from professors who had believed in her potential. Conference programs where her name appeared as a presenter. Draft papers that had never been published because her life had taken a different direction. Here, Ruby said, pulling out a photograph that made Keisha gasp. This was taken at the University of Chicago Physics Department in 1978. The black and white photo showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Keisha, standing in front of a blackboard covered with equations. Her natural hair formed a perfect afro, and her eyes sparkled with confidence and intelligence. She wore a simple dress and held a piece of chalk like a magic wand. "You look just like me," Keisha whispered. "No, sweet child. You look just like me. The question is, what are you going to do with that resemblance?" Ruby set the photograph aside and took Keisha's hands in her own. "I need you to understand something important. I don't want you to feel pressured to pursue mathematics because of my abandoned dreams. I want you to pursue whatever brings you joy and fulfillment." "But what if mathematics does bring me joy? What if I want to continue what you started?" Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Then I will support you in every way I can. But Keisha, promise me something. Promise me that if you choose science, you'll choose it for yourself, not for me." "I promise," Keisha said solemnly. "But Grandma Ruby, can I ask you something else?" "Anything, baby girl." "Will you teach me? Really teach me, the way you would have taught university students? Not just homework help, but real mathematics, real physics." Ruby wiped away a tear and squeezed Keisha's hands tighter. "There is nothing in this world I would love more." As the afternoon faded into evening, grandmother and granddaughter sat surrounded by 45 years of stored dreams. But for the first time in decades, Ruby felt like those dreams hadn't been wasted. They had been planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom again in fresh soil. The legacy would continue, not as obligation but as love transformed into learning. Wisdom passed from one generation to the next like the most precious inheritance imaginable. Monday morning arrived with the bitter chill of late November, frost covering the windows of the brick house on Cottage Grove Avenue like crystalline warnings. Keisha woke with a lightness she hadn't felt in months, her mind buzzing with quantum equations and the promise of after-school lessons with Ruby. She dressed carefully in a royal blue sweater that matched the one her grandmother had worn in that decades-old photograph, feeling like she was honoring both past and future. The weekend had been transformative. Ruby had begun teaching her real physics, starting with the foundational concepts that universities rarely explained properly. They had worked through thermodynamics problems at the kitchen table, Ruby's patient explanations making complex theories feel as natural as breathing. For the first time in her life, Keisha understood that mathematics wasn't just a subject she was good at, it was her birthright. At Lincoln High School, word of Friday's confrontation had spread like wildfire. Students nodded respectfully as Keisha walked through the hallways, and several approached her with genuine curiosity about her grandmother's background. The atmosphere felt different, charged with a new kind of respect that Keisha had never experienced before. "Keisha!" Jessica Martinez caught up with her at her locker, her face bright with excitement. "My mom heard about what happened from Mrs. Rodriguez. She wants to know if your grandmother would be willing to speak at the community center about women in science." "I'll ask her," Keisha replied, organizing her books with careful precision. Though she's pretty private about her past. I can't believe you never knew she was a physicist. That's so cool that she's teaching you now. It feels like discovering I have superpowers I never knew existed, Keisha laughed, then stopped. Actually, that's exactly what it feels like. First period chemistry passed without incident. Mrs. Park treated Keisha with the same professional respect she showed all her students, and the lesson on molecular bonding felt like review after Ruby's weekend explanations about atomic interactions. Keisha found herself thinking several steps ahead of the curriculum, understanding implications that wouldn't be covered until AP chemistry next year. Second period English literature was equally smooth. They were discussing symbolism in Maya Angelou's poetry, and Keisha contributed thoughtfully to the conversation, feeling confident and intellectually engaged in a way that had been missing since Thursday's humiliation. But as she walked toward room 237 for third period calculus, Keisha's stomach began to flutter with nervous energy. She hadn't seen Mr. Patterson since Friday's confrontation, and she wasn't sure what to expect. Principal Johnson had assured them that the teacher would behave professionally, but Keisha had learned not to trust assurances when it came to Mr. Patterson. She entered the classroom with her chin up and her shoulders back, carrying herself with the same quiet confidence she had observed in Ruby. Several classmates smiled at her genuinely, including Marcus Williams, who usually kept to himself in the back row. "Glad you're back," Marcus said quietly as she passed his desk. "That was messed up what happened last week." Mr. Patterson stood at the whiteboard with his back to the class, writing out homework problems in his familiar, precise handwriting. He wore the same navy blazer as always, but something about his posture seemed diminished, less commanding than before. When he turned to face the class, his pale blue eyes carefully avoided meeting Keisha's gaze. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying none of its usual theatrical authority. "Let's begin with a review of logarithmic differentiation." The lesson proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. Mr. Patterson explained concepts clearly and professionally, calling on students randomly but fairly. When he asked Keisha to solve a problem involving the chain rule, she answered confidently and correctly, and he simply nodded and moved on without comment. But as the period progressed, Keisha began to notice subtle changes in the classroom dynamic. Whispered conversations that stopped when she looked around. Glances exchanged between students when they thought she wasn't paying attention. The uncomfortable feeling that she was being discussed rather than included. During a break while Mr. Patterson wrote new problems on the board, Tyler Morrison leaned over from his seat behind her. "So is it true your grandmother made Patterson look like an idiot?" he whispered, but his tone wasn't friendly. There was something sharp underneath the words. "She defended me," Keisha replied quietly, not turning around. "That's what grandmothers do." "Must be nice, having someone fight your battles for you," Tyler continued, his voice barely audible but cutting. "Some of us have to prove ourselves on our own." Keisha's pencil paused over her notebook. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," Tyler said with fake innocence. "Just that it's interesting how some people get special treatment." Before Keisha could respond, Mr. Patterson called for attention. "Let's work through this next problem together. Miss Chen, would you start us off?" But the damage was done. Tyler's words echoed in Keisha's mind as the lesson continued. Special treatment. The phrase felt like poison, seeping into her newfound confidence and raising questions she didn't want to confront. After class, as students filed out for lunch, Brad Chen approached her locker with an expression that seemed friendly on the surface but carried undertones that made Keisha wary. "Hey, Keisha," he said casually, "crazy story about your grandmother being some kind of genius physicist." "She's very intelligent," Keisha replied carefully, sensing a trap. "Oh, totally. It's just..." Brad paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Some people are saying that's why you're really in advanced math." Like, family connections and all that. Family connections? Keisha's voice rose slightly. What are you talking about? I'm not saying anything, Brad backpedaled quickly. It's just what some people are saying. That maybe you're getting advantages because of who your grandmother is. My grandmother didn't even tell me about her background until Friday, Keisha protested. I've been in advanced math since freshman year. Right. Of course. Brad's smile was patronizing in a way that made Keisha's skin crawl. It's just that some people think it's weird how you went from struggling with basic problems to being all confident again so quickly. The hallway suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too full of watching eyes and whispered judgments. Keisha slammed her locker door with more force than necessary. I wasn't struggling with basic problems. Mr. Patterson was trying to humiliate me. If you say so, Brad shrugged. Though it's kind of convenient that your secret genius grandmother showed up just when you needed rescuing. The word rescuing hit Keisha like a physical blow. She had been rescued. Ruby had come to her defense when she couldn't defend herself. And now everyone knew that she needed protection, that she couldn't handle academic challenges on her own. At lunch, Keisha sat with Jessica Martinez and her usual group, but the conversation felt strained. Even Jessica, who had been nothing but supportive, seemed to treat her differently now. More carefully, as if Keisha might break or as if she might have hidden advantages that needed to be respected rather than earned. It must be amazing having someone so smart in your family, Jessica said as they picked at their cafeteria salads. Like having a personal tutor who knows everything. She's teaching me some things, Keisha admitted, but I've always been good at math on my own. Oh, absolutely, Jessica agreed quickly. I just meant it must give you such a head start, you know? Like insider knowledge. Insider knowledge. Head start. Special advantages. The phrases accumulated throughout the lunch period as more students approached with comments that seemed supportive on the surface but carried implications that made Keisha increasingly uncomfortable. By the time she reached her afternoon classes, Keisha felt like she was drowning in a sea of qualified praise and backhanded compliments. Everyone was being so careful to acknowledge her intelligence while simultaneously suggesting that it came from external sources rather than her own mind. Walking home from school, Keisha's thoughts spiraled darker with each block. What if they were right? What if she had only seemed smart because Ruby had been subtly helping her all along? What if her confidence in mathematics was built on a foundation of secret assistance rather than genuine ability? The November wind cut through her royal blue sweater as she climbed the front steps of the brick house, and for the first time since Friday, she felt the familiar weight of self-doubt settling back onto her shoulders like a heavy coat she couldn't remove. Ruby was waiting in the kitchen with chamomile tea and a physics textbook, ready for their afternoon lesson. But as Keisha looked at her grandmother's expectant smile, all she could hear were the voices of her classmates suggesting that everything she had achieved was really just reflected glory from someone else's abandoned dreams. Have you ever felt like your achievements were being diminished by others? How do you handle it when people suggest your success isn't entirely your own? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more stories about overcoming doubt. The notebook Ruby had prepared lay open on the table, filled with quantum mechanics problems that suddenly looked less like exciting challenges and more like evidence of unfair advantages. The physics textbook lay open on the kitchen table like an accusation, its pages filled with equations that Ruby had carefully selected for their afternoon lesson. Keisha stood in the doorway, still wearing her royal blue sweater and carrying her backpack, but her earlier enthusiasm had evaporated like steam from the cooling teacups. How was school today, baby girl? Ruby asked, looking up from her notes with the warm smile that had greeted Keisha every afternoon for 3 years. I found some beautiful problems involving wave-particle duality that I think you'll love. Keisha set her backpack down slowly, the weight of the day's conversations pressing against her chest like a stone. Grandma Ruby, can I ask you something? Of course, sweet child. Anything. Have you been helping me with my math homework more than I realized? Ruby's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her features. What do you mean? I mean. Keisha struggled to find the right words, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. Have I been smart all along, or have I just been smart because you were secretly teaching me things other kids didn't know? The question hung in the kitchen air between them, heavy with implications that Ruby was only beginning to understand. She set down her pencil and studied her granddaughter's face, noting the tension around her eyes and the defensive set of her shoulders. Keisha, what happened at school today? People are saying things, Keisha burst out, the words tumbling over each other in her rush to get them spoken. They're saying I only got into advanced math because of family connections. They're saying you've been giving me unfair advantages this whole time. They're saying I needed to be rescued because I can't actually handle academic pressure on my own. Ruby felt something cold settle in her stomach. Who is saying these things? Everyone. Keisha's voice cracked slightly. Not directly, but the way they look at me now, the way they talk about how lucky I am to have such a smart grandmother, the way they act like my intelligence is borrowed instead of real. She began pacing the small kitchen, her movements sharp and agitated. Tyler Morrison said it must be nice having someone fight my battles for me. Brad Chen talked about family connections and insider knowledge. Even Jessica, who's supposed to be my friend, acts like I have some kind of unfair advantage now. Ruby stood slowly, her heart breaking as she watched her granddaughter's confidence crumble in real time. Baby girl, you know that's not true. Do I? Keisha stopped pacing and faced her grandmother directly. How would I know? You never told me you were a physicist. You never told me you understood advanced mathematics better than my teachers. What if I've been coasting on your help without realizing it? Keisha Thompson, that is absolutely ridiculous. Is it? Keisha's voice rose, months of academic pressure and teenage insecurity finally finding an outlet. You said yourself that you've been helping me see patterns, showing me shortcuts, explaining concepts in ways that made them easier to understand. What if other kids are struggling because they don't have secret PhD grandmothers teaching them at home? Ruby felt tears pricking at her eyes as she recognized the cruel logic of adolescent self-doubt. Sweet child, do you honestly believe that helping you with homework somehow invalidates your intelligence? I don't know what to believe anymore. Keisha exploded, her careful composure finally shattering completely. Last week I thought I was smart. Then Mr. Patterson made me feel stupid. Then you showed up and made me feel proud. Now everyone's acting like my pride is based on a lie. She slumped into one of the kitchen chairs, her head in her hands. Maybe I should just drop back to regular math classes. Maybe I don't actually belong in advanced calculus. Ruby felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest, the same feeling that had driven her to march into Lincoln High School with her briefcase full of credentials. But this was different. This wasn't about defending Keisha from external attacks. This was about helping her granddaughter find her way back to believing in herself. Keisha Marie Thompson, Ruby said quietly, sitting down across from her. Look at me. Keisha raised her head reluctantly, her brown eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you remember the first time you solved a quadratic equation? What does that have to do with anything? Humor your grandmother. Do you remember? Keisha sighed. I was 13. You were helping me with algebra homework, and I couldn't understand why the x values worked out the way they did. And what did I do? You. Keisha paused, thinking back. You asked me to think about it like a balance scale. You said to imagine the equation as two sides that had to be equal, and that finding x was like figuring out what weight would make the scale balance perfectly. Did I give you the answer? No, Keisha admitted grudgingly. You made me work it out myself. You just helped me understand what the problem was really asking. And when you finally got it right, what happened? A small smile flickered across Keisha's face despite her distress. I got so excited I solved 10 more problems without asking for help. I stayed up until midnight working through every quadratic equation in the textbook. Because you loved the feeling of understanding, Ruby said gently. Because your mind was built for mathematical thinking, and once you understood the concept, you couldn't stop exploring it. Ruby reached across the table and took Keisha's hands in her own. Baby girl, I have watched you discover mathematical concepts with the same joy I felt at your age. I have seen your face light up when a difficult problem finally makes sense. I have watched you work through complex calculations with patience and precision that most adults don't possess. But you were helping. I was guiding, Ruby corrected firmly. The way any good teacher guides their students. The way Professor Williams guided me when I was struggling with quantum mechanics. The way Dr. Yang helped me understand field theory applications. Guidance isn't cheating, sweet child. It's education. She squeezed Keisha's hands gently. Do you think my professors invalidated my intelligence by helping me learn? Do you think every brilliant scientist who ever had a mentor was somehow less capable because they didn't figure everything out in isolation? Keisha was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind working through the logic of Ruby's argument. No, she said finally. That would be stupid. Then why are you applying a different standard to yourself? Because. Keisha struggled to articulate the fear that had been growing all day. Because what if I'm not actually as smart as I thought? What if I've just been good at math because I had better help than everyone else? Ruby stood and walked to the kitchen drawer where she kept important papers. She pulled out a manila folder and returned to the table. I want to show you something, she said, opening the folder to reveal a stack of graded homework assignments and test papers. These are your math tests from the past 3 years. Keisha looked down at the papers, seeing her own handwriting and grades spanning from freshman algebra through current calculus work. Grades, A- grades, the occasional B+ on particularly challenging exams. Look at the dates, Ruby instructed. And tell me when I started helping you with homework. Keisha examined the papers more carefully, noting the consistent pattern of strong performance. You've always helped me when I asked, she said slowly. And look at your test grades from times when you were stressed or we hadn't had time to study together. Keisha flipped through more papers, finding tests from periods when Ruby had been sick with flu, or when Keisha had been staying with friends, or when life had simply been too busy for their usual study sessions. The grades remained consistently high. Your intelligence doesn't come from me, baby girl, Ruby said softly. It comes from you. I may have helped you learn to use it more effectively, but the mind that understands these concepts, the brain that sees mathematical patterns, the intuition that guides you toward solutions, that's all yours. Keisha stared at the evidence spread before her, feeling the tight knot of doubt in her chest beginning to loosen slightly. But what about what everyone's saying at school? Ruby's smile was sad but knowing. People will always try to diminish what they don't understand or what makes them feel inadequate about themselves. The question is whether you're going to let their insecurity become your limitation. She gathered the test papers and returned them to the folder. You have a choice to make, Keisha. You can let other people's voices become louder than your own knowledge of who you are, or you can choose to believe in the evidence of your own capabilities. Ruby gestured toward the physics textbook still open on the table. That quantum mechanics lesson is still waiting for you. But only if you want it. Only if you're ready to claim your intelligence as your own, regardless of what anyone else thinks about how you acquired it. Keisha looked at the textbook, then at her grandmother, then back at the evidence of her own consistent academic achievement. For the first time all day, She felt the familiar flutter of excitement that came with approaching a challenging mathematical concept. "Teach me about wave-particle duality," she said quietly. Ruby's smile was radiant. "Now that, sweet child, sounds like the voice of someone who knows exactly how smart she is." ACT 9. Resolution: 1,450 words. 3 weeks later, the first Tuesday of December brought fresh snow to Chicago and a special assembly at Lincoln High School that had been announced only that morning. Students filed into the auditorium with the restless energy of teenagers pulled away from regular classes, whispers and speculation rippling through the rows of seats. Keisha sat in the third row beside Jessica Martinez, wearing a deep emerald sweater that brought out the confidence in her brown eyes. The past weeks had been transformative in ways she was still discovering. Her afternoon physics lessons with Ruby had evolved into something magical. Not just learning, but genuine scientific exploration that left her buzzing with excitement about quantum possibilities and energy applications. "Do you know what this assembly is about?" Jessica asked, craning her neck to see the stage where Principal Johnson was adjusting the microphone. "No idea," Keisha replied, though something in her grandmother's secretive smile that morning had suggested Ruby knew more than she was letting on. "Students and faculty of Lincoln High School," Principal Johnson began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "Today we have the honor of hosting a presentation by one of our community's most distinguished scientists." A murmur of curiosity moved through the crowd. Tyler Morrison, sitting 2 rows behind Keisha, muttered something about boring guest speakers, but his voice lacked the cruel edge it had carried 3 weeks ago. "Our presenter holds a doctorate in theoretical physics from the University of Chicago, conducted groundbreaking research in quantum field applications, and was invited to join the prestigious Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton." Principal Johnson paused, his eyes scanning the audience with obvious pride. "Please welcome Dr. Ruby Thompson." The auditorium erupted in surprised chatter as Ruby walked onto the stage, wearing the same tailored black pantsuit she had worn to confront Mr. Patterson, but now carrying herself with the natural authority of someone comfortable in academic settings. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant updo, and she carried herself with quiet dignity that commanded immediate respect. Keisha's jaw dropped. "Grandma Ruby," she whispered, her heart swelling with pride and amazement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ruby began, her voice warm but professional as the auditorium settled into attentive silence, "I want to talk to you today about the mathematics of possibility." She clicked a remote, and the large screen behind her displayed a photograph of the Earth taken from space, brilliant blue and white against the darkness of the cosmos. This image represents approximately 10 to the power of 50 atoms working together in perfect harmony to create the planet we call home. Every single one of those atoms follows mathematical laws that we can understand, predict, and use to solve problems that matter. The audience was captivated. Even the students who usually looked bored during assemblies were leaning forward, drawn in by Ruby's natural teaching ability and the stunning visuals she had prepared. "But I'm not here to lecture you about quantum mechanics," Ruby continued with a slight smile. "I'm here to talk about something much more powerful, the mathematics of human potential." She clicked to the next slide, showing a graph with climbing trend lines. Research shows that when students are encouraged to see mathematics as exploration rather than memorization, their problem-solving abilities increase by an average of 300%. When they're taught to see patterns instead of just formulas, their confidence grows exponentially. Keisha felt her chest swell with recognition. This was exactly what Ruby had been teaching her. Not just equations, but ways of thinking about mathematical relationships. However, Ruby's voice grew more serious. "There's another mathematical principle we need to discuss. It's called the diminishment effect." The screen showed a new graph, this one with declining curves. When students are made to feel that their intelligence is somehow fraudulent or unearned, their performance drops dramatically. When they're told their achievements come from outside advantages rather than their own capabilities, they begin to doubt every success they experience. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tyler Morrison had stopped whispering entirely. This is particularly devastating for students from underrepresented communities, who already face the additional burden of having to prove they belong in academic environments that weren't designed with them in mind. Ruby's eyes found Keisha in the audience, and her smile was both proud and protective. But here's the beautiful thing about mathematics: it doesn't lie. Numbers don't care about prejudice or assumptions. When someone solves a complex equation correctly, the math doesn't care what color their skin is or what their family background looks like. The equation is either solved correctly or it isn't. She clicked to a new slide showing a series of advanced physics equations. These are quantum field calculations I've been working on recently with a very gifted student. They represent cutting-edge thinking about energy conservation that could potentially revolutionize renewable power systems. Keisha's eyes widened as she recognized the equations they had derived together just 2 days ago, working through thermodynamic principles at the kitchen table. My student understood these concepts intuitively, asked questions that challenged my own thinking, and contributed insights that improved the theoretical framework we were developing together. Ruby's voice carried obvious pride. This student didn't achieve this understanding because of family advantages or unfair help. This student succeeded because she has a brilliant mathematical mind and the courage to use it. The auditorium was completely silent now, every person focused intently on Ruby's presentation. Intelligence is not inherited like eye color, Ruby continued. It's developed through curiosity, practice, and the willingness to engage with difficult concepts even when they seem impossible at first. It's cultivated through asking questions, making mistakes, and trying again with better understanding. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. I want every student in this auditorium to understand something crucial. Your mind is your own. Your achievements belong to you. And anyone who tries to convince you that your success comes from outside advantages rather than your own capabilities is someone who doesn't understand how learning actually works. Ruby clicked to her final slide, showing a simple equation: potential plus effort plus support equals achievement. Notice that support is part of the equation, she said with a gentle smile. Good teachers, encouraging families, and positive learning environments all contribute to academic success. But support doesn't replace potential or effort, it amplifies them. She set down her remote and stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I challenge each of you to reject the mathematics of diminishment and embrace the mathematics of possibility. Don't let anyone convince you that your intelligence is borrowed or that your achievements are somehow less valid because you had help learning how to use your capabilities effectively. The auditorium remained silent for a moment after Ruby finished speaking, then erupted in enthusiastic applause. Students and teachers rose to their feet, clapping with genuine appreciation for both the presentation and its message. As the assembly concluded and students filed out, Keisha felt several classmates approach her with different energy than they had carried in recent weeks. Your grandmother is incredible, Marcus Williams said, his voice carrying genuine respect. Those equations she showed were insane. You must be learning so much from her. She's teaching me to think differently about problems, Keisha replied, standing a little taller. But the understanding comes from working through the concepts myself. That's so cool that you're already doing college-level physics, Jessica added. I can barely handle regular chemistry. For the first time in weeks, Keisha felt no need to minimize her achievements or apologize for her advantages. It's challenging, but I love the way mathematics reveals how everything in the universe connects. Tyler Morrison approached as the group dispersed, looking genuinely uncomfortable. Hey, Keisha, he said quietly. I wanted to apologize for some of the things I said a few weeks ago. That was messed up of me. Keisha studied his face, seeing sincere regret rather than the defensive arrogance she had expected. Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to apologize. Your grandmother's presentation really made me think about some stuff, Tyler continued. About how I sometimes tear down other people when I'm feeling insecure about my own abilities. As the auditorium emptied, Keisha made her way to the stage where Ruby was packing up her materials. Principal Johnson was thanking her enthusiastically, already asking about return visits and ongoing partnerships with the school's mathematics department. "Grandma Ruby," Keisha said when they finally had a moment alone. "That was amazing. But why didn't you tell me you were speaking today?" Ruby's smile was mischievous and proud. "Because I wanted you to hear those words without any pressure or expectation. I wanted you to know that everything I said up there, I meant about you specifically." She pulled Keisha into a warm hug. "You are brilliant, baby girl. Not because I taught you, but because you chose to learn. Not because of family advantages, but because you have the courage to engage with difficult concepts and make them your own." As they walked out of Lincoln High School together, Keisha felt the last remnants of doubt dissolve like morning frost in sunlight. She knew exactly who she was, a young woman with her own mathematical mind, ready to explore whatever equations the universe wanted to throw at her. The December snow sparkled in the afternoon sun as they drove home, and Ruby hummed softly while Keisha planned her applications to engineering programs that would challenge her to grow even further. The legacy was no longer about abandoned dreams or sacrificed potential. It was about love transformed into learning, wisdom passed forward, and the infinite mathematics of possibility that stretched ahead like an open road. In the rearview mirror, Lincoln High School grew smaller, but the future ahead felt boundless and bright with mathematical promise. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.